Joseph McCarthy bred illegal and unethical behavior in nearly everyone around him. They operated not in the shadows of international espionage, but in the mundane spaces of everyday life. An immigration lawyer, a receptionist in an organization, a policy analyst in an association, university professors, and city councilors. McCarthy had so many informants spying on alleged communists, they got their own name, the McCarthy Underground. This network became so pervasive that the simple act of friendship or association could become evidence of subversion, and the line between civic duty and betrayal dissolved entirely. Is this what we're witnessing in Belfast? A McCarthy Underground operating under a different nom de plume. When informants are embedded in living quarters, when allegations of prejudice are dismissed, and when institutions meant to protect victims instead red flag those who ask critical questions, are we not seeing the resurrection of the McCarthy Underground? I'm Kiana Canada, and this is Mimicking McCarthyism, an examination of an obstruction of justice, a response to PSNI's online hate crimes week statement, and whether the propositions made holds up under scrutiny. Hate Crime Week in Northern Ireland should not only celebrate PSNI's stated commitment to combating division, but also to bring awareness to their complicity in fostering division in Belfast. A couple of months ago, I became the victim of a hate crime when PSNI intentionally placed an informant in my living quarters. This wasn't a matter of random roommate allocation. This was strategic placement with a purpose. The informant found frivolous reasons to scream at me, making prejudicial and racial statements about Black Americans, their goal to provoke a reaction out of me. She also attempted to justify the torching of homes in Ballymena. However, when I stated that no one deserved to be burned out of their homes and endeavored to educate her on the historical context of racial violence, the very kind of educational dialogue the Chief Superintendent Sue Steen says is necessary for a, quote, modern and diverse society, end quote, the informant summoned PSNI. When they arrived, the informant claimed that I was giving her unsolicited advice about Black history. Despite reporting the incident, explaining to PSNI that her behavior fell within Dana Moss's typology of transnational repression, I wasn't taken seriously. She then performed a gesture I found to be threatening. This prompted me to video record, stating that I felt her behavior was similar to a person who was part of a terror organization. I was subsequently attacked by her. The intentional creation of a hostile environment through a PSNI agent cannot coexist with a genuine commitment to hate crime prevention. If the PSNI were genuinely committed to the principle that, quote, no one should ever have to endure abuse, intimidation, or violence simply because of who they are, end quote, then its deliberate placement of an informant who engages in racial harassment would constitute a fundamental betrayal of that commitment. To be sure, the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission's July 2024 submission to the UNCERD committee explicitly acknowledges that racist hate crimes and hate incidents are increasing in Northern Ireland. The submission further notes that people from ethnic minority backgrounds report that racism is a, quote, normal part of day-to-day life, end quote, and that the response to hate crime is ineffective with low prosecution rates. This is not to suggest that every PSNI officer participates in such operations, but rather that institutional practices exist directly to contradict stated commitments to protecting victims of hate crimes, particularly those victims who don't fit predetermined categories. One might argue that I misunderstood the situation, or that the informant was not actually operating under PSNI direction. However, when I told PSNI I would research who instructed the informant to act, they threatened me with prosecution. Why would PSNI threaten me with prosecution for seeking truth about my own victimization if it had nothing to conceal? Groups in Belfast did not advocate on my behalf because of my American nationality and the mere fact I wasn't Muslim, revealing that hate crime recognition in Belfast operates through a hierarchy of victimhood rather than universal principles. Even groups with which I shared identity refused to support me because all the numbers were on the side of Muslims. Evidence shows in Belfast, solidarity has become a calculus, a matter of optics, numbers, and theological ties rather than principle. I understood this calculation even as I suffered from it. So I decided to get my own agency back by filing a hate crime complaint. I asked specifically to speak to a hate crime specialist. However, Chief Superintendent Shu Steen did not speak with me. Instead, 2 officers from the neighborhood team came out to speak with me. When I explained the events leading up to my complaint, they attempted to manipulate me into feeling that the informant's motivation for attacking me was completely lawful, despite her actions, stereotypes, and prejudices laying the foundation for a hate crime charge. If the PSNI's hate crime response infrastructure includes dedicated hate crime specialists, then the failure to provide access to such specialists when specifically requested suggests deliberate gatekeeping designed to minimize certain complaints. The substitution of neighborhood officers for specialists indicate institutional triage based on predetermined assessments of whose victimhood matters the most. The PSNI's own structure acknowledges the need for specialized hate crime responses. For instance, they employ hate crime incident minority liaison officers, maintain a service lead at the chief superintendent level, and operate a hate crime advocacy service. Yet this infrastructure was bypassed in my particular case. Research has consistently shown that particular groups in Belfast report their experience of hate crime and that it has gone unaddressed. A significant percentage of participants had experienced hate crimes in Belfast, yet the system failed to adequately respond. This pattern may not be uniform across all PSNI districts, but the consistency of complaints from social groups suggests systemic rather than isolated failures. PSNI might argue that neighborhood officers are trained to handle hate crime and specialist responses. A specialist response isn't always necessary. However, this ignores the fact that when a victim specifically requests specialist intervention, denying that request signals that their case is being downgraded. Next, my claim of victimization challenged PSNI's established narrative of Black Americans as perpetrators of crime rather than victims deserving protection. For clarity, the informant's alleged religion and nationality never traveled across my thoughts. The hunch I felt about her being part of a terror group was a genuine presumption she never dispelled. It was not grounded in prejudice, but in her documented actions within the home and PSNI's own statement alleging she was, quote, not their informant, end quote. A denial that paradoxically confirmed the relevance of my inquiry. Moreover, there is no evidence that national security groups or organized crime groups operate in monolith, confined only to one ethnic or national group. The assumption that my identifying someone's behavior as consistent with national security concerns is religiously and ethnically prejudicial, and it reveals a bias that it purports to condemn. To reiterate, I never mentioned the informant's alleged religion or nationality. However, the evidence demonstrates she specifically commented on my nationality and ethnicity, which I found to be prejudicial. So the previous statement by PSNI on this point must fail. The informant had free rein to bully me inside the accommodation. The question is, who gave it to her? Yet when I began to document her behavior, I was labeled an instigator. Here, I had not recorded in the home and did not provoke the informant, but she attempted to provoke a reaction out of me. In Teixeira de Castro versus Portugal, the European Court of Human Rights stated that citing the commission of an offense goes beyond the acceptable activities of an undercover agent. The court also made it clear that an applicant who had no predisposition to commit an offense is evidence of entrapment. Entrapment consists when the PSNI made the decision to create the conditions for criminal behavior rather than merely observing it. Although I was never arrested, had the PSNI never incited the informant to harass me, I would have not documented her egregious behavior on the day in question. I wasn't the ideal victim for PSNI. PSNI failed to recognize me as a victim in the complaint I first filed. On this account, I sought intervention from the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission. But when I raised a critical question with the Commission about why I needed to have a Muslim identity to be seen as a victim in Northern Ireland, they red flagged me. I never threatened any person. I did not use racial slurs, nor was my inquiry based on prejudicial feelings about a social group. I was simply asking questions, and this got me red flagged. Did they make this decision on their own, or were they instructed to? You see, Article 5 of the UN Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination guarantees the right to everyone without distinction as to race, color, and national or ethnic origin to equality before the law. Further, Article 4 of the UNCERD condemns all propaganda such as prejudicial statements that Black Americans are aggressive, dangerous, or violent because it justifies racial hatred and discrimination. Thus, the UNCERD calls on state parties to adopt immediate and positive measures designed to eradicate all incitement to or acts of such discrimination. As for Ireland, the UNCERD committee recommended that it adopt a comprehensive legal framework to combat racist hate crimes, take effective measures to ensure its implementation, and provide continuous training to law enforcement officials, judges, and prosecutors on addressing and investigating hate crimes. These are not aspirational goals, they are binding obligations. Asking why protection appears contingent on theological grounds is not threatening. Responding in a manner so that others believe it is contradicts the fundamental universality of human rights. Now, one might argue that my question was inappropriate or that I should have framed it differently. Yet, I would argue that the question was in its proper context based on the responses and activities of the PSNI. McCarthy's underground sought to ruin reputations and the lives of everyone through institutional intimidation, such as what happens to victims during transnational repression. This is why a national inquiry is important in Belfast. If the Commission elects not to hold a national inquiry, if it elects not to ask whether state agents are fostering the very division that they claim to combat, then who precisely does the Commission protect? Belfast should also ask the question, do the intelligence agencies here have any sense of decency? Not as rhetoric, but as demand, not as performance, but as principle, not someday, but now. Because every day that goes by and questions go unanswered, the underground operates. Another day, a researcher is expelled. Another day, a life is upended by transnational repression. Another day, a state agent gets away with state crime. See you tomorrow.